And I was told, good, look, man, Miles, you are not a proper K. It's not a rechte kafrni. So we will treat you otherwise, but please don't make them clever, these people. Don't educate these people, because they will remain what they are. And those are the things that made me very angry. Prisoners, fellow prisoners, were assaulted, they were brutalized. Some of them were killed. Some of them were thrown into the furnace. Now, the furnace is this big stoves that are used to cook food for prisoners. They used to throw some of these prisoners in there and write a letter that he escaped from prison. And it's unfortunate that the new dispensation has adopted that kind of mentality, turning it into a glorified Bantustan, where our black brothers will tell you that ibantiti lamlil, ijele lamlil, igandaganda yamle, ingolovana yamle.
Dr. Miles.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us on Something Nice with Dinano. So thank you for your opportunity. I met you on the other day. Know the face. I know you have been doing this prisoners' rights activism for so long. Please give us a background about who you are, what you do, for someone who doesn't know who Golden Miles Bhudu is.
Thank you for the opportunity. I was born and bred on the 1st of October 1960. So in other words, I'm almost 64 years old. I was born and bred in a small rural town. We call it nowadays the countryside. It's far East Rand then. It's now called Far Ekurhuleni, city of Ekurhuleni. It's on the border of Mpumalanga and Gauteng. It's about 18 kilometers from the border. And then if you cross the border, then you will be in Balfour, in Mpumalanga. That is where I was born and bred. And I was born and bred and classified as other color, the under Clearlam, because I'm a breed of Hindu. That's my grandfather, my father's father, and Mabaso. That is my grandma. Okay. And from the side of my mother is half Scottish, half Zulu. So that is where the fun or the surname comes from, called Bhudu. So I had a privilege to go to a colored school, even though I was classified under Clearlam. And that is, in fact, what made me to what I am today. I've fallen in love with Afrikaans. I speak Afrikaans. I sleep, talk Afrikaans. I walk Afrikaans. And I am not going to be apologetic, neither am I going to ask for permission. And the privilege that one had to go to a colored school, it's all the subjects were in Afrikaans. Okay. And there was a certain privilege in that. Let me not venture into it because it might upset some of our views.
It's a story for another day. I told you we need to talk about that.
Yes.
Ubabu Bhudu, I see you on TV with, they call them plats, right? It's closer to Mafreho, and you are in chains. Just a brief history of how you got to do that and how you got to do what you're doing now, an activist for prisoner rights and the body that you work with in that space.
Well, I was arrested and I was charged and I was prosecuted in 1984 for housebreaking with the intention to steal and theft. Myself and 4 of my co-accused forcefully entered into a Lapnus warehouse. It was an inside job. And because I didn't have a buyer, I was angry, adventurous, and I wanted to make a point, being angry for having been dismissed for my activism at a company I worked called Cecil 2. I went there in 1980 after I finished my matric. I became rebellious there, and then from there they decided to send me for further studies. And I was 6 months on the plant, 6 months at the college, the voormalige,
Okay.
the previous Valtechnicon. I don't know what it's called now. And then I did my 6 months in, 6 months out, 6 months practical and 6 months theoretical, in the lab. And that was tried to soften me because I was very rebellious due to the fact that I was classified and other colored. I was allowed to do analysis in the laboratory, and some of my black brothers that had the same qualification were not allowed to be laboratory analyst and laboratory technician because of their color, and they had the same qualification, maths, science, biology, and you must have passed it with flying colors. So that is why I got very angry and wanted to become a unionist and an activist. They took me in to go and do my studies so to soften me. I came back, and when I finished with my studies, I was more rebellious than previously. That is how I lost my job. So I became very angry. Wherever I went to with my qualifications, I couldn't get a job because the reference was staggering. It was bad news.
Because of the imprisonment now?
No, because of
Or your activism?
yes,
Okay.
wanting to form a chemical union or become part of a chemical union.
Okay.
That was in the mid 80s.
Okay.
That was during the days when trade unionism and political activist was at its height. Okay, so I then became very angry. I couldn't get a job. I was qualified because of my activism where I work, and then we ended up in a Shabin in Nigel at Duduza because that is the nearest location, Ikasi, from the colored area called Alrapak. Now Alrapak came as a result of forceful removal. That was Chatterstone. It was a black area, and people were in the early 70s forcefully removed to Duduza. And then I've got also family in Duduza. Okay, so we once met with friends of mine at the Shabin, and we planned to burglar Lapnus furniture in Nigel. And it was very interesting because it was the first black guy that was appointed as a assistant manager at a Lapnus shop, deep rural or semi-rural Afrikanerdom, and it was just a Boerebond area. And then when we had our drinks, we started discussing and talking and so on. So this guy, I convinced him, and then he ended up making duplicate keys to get into Lapnus warehouse. And I've got 3 other guys, so we were 4. And one day we decided to plunder and loot the furniture shop. Now, the snag is I didn't have a buyer up front. Seemingly, the 3 of my co-accused that were staying in Duduza had people that immediately took the loot to the buyer. And whilst I was looking for a buyer, on a Thursday, the police were informed about furniture because it was the talk of the town. Furniture that was stored in a warehouse. And that was my late grandfather's general dealer shop. And that's how I got arrested. And then I took the rap. It's
fairly small.
yes. Unfortunately, Labafu to Laba, they never came to visit me as a waiting trialist. And even when I was convicted, they never came to visit me. So they just left me. But then I did my time, and when I was in prison, we met Mkonto Sizwe Kedas, they called them the very last Delmas trialist, because they were the first Delmas trialist, the second and the third, and then they were the very last Delmas trialist. And before the last Delmas trialist, that these guys were Botera Likota, Nabomfuking, Abo Popomvlifi, and so on, So I was convicted and sent to a prison in Nigel. It was a not a medium. It was a short time institution or a prison. And then I was transferred to Modabi medium because I also became very rebellious as an activist. Yes, I became rebellious for the fact that I was dismissed as a activist at Cecil 2, and I couldn't get a job anyway because of my reference, you know. And I ended up with friends of mine. We met at a shebeen or a tavern, and then we started talking about what eventually ended me up in prison. But this was a well-planned inside job, because this very guy who was the first black assistant manager at Lapnes was at the tavern. We had a chat with him, and then the topic came out, and I think I must have driven the topic. And then he made duplicate keys for us, and then what we did, we decided one morning from 12 o'clock in the morning to loot Lapnes warehouse, open the storeroom. And he also told us that there are delivery vans where the delivery van keys were hid. But he then said to me, Miles, you guys must just bring back the delivery buckets or the trucks, you know, because if you guys get arrested, you will also be charged for theft of the vans. So what we did we were 4 guys. We did 4 loads. Each and everyone had enough loot that we stole from Lapnes warehouse, and I stored mine at my late grandfather's general dealer storeroom, and then it became the talk of the town because it happened on a Sunday morning. The whole week until Thursday, everybody was talking about this huge.
There's something you said. You said to make it look like a robbery. What did you do at the store?
Well, in fact, let's rather keep it as a housebreaking with the intention to steal and theft, because there were no human beings that were threatened, that were victimized or were attacked. It was just a smooth inside job where we opened the back of the warehouse, and then thereafter we ended up destroying the doors so that it looked like a housebreaking, you know, but it was not. It was open up, take things, and then these were fridges, these were freezers, these were TVs, video machines, these were dining room sets, bedroom sets, kitchen sets, and so on. We emptied the warehouse with 4 loading trucks or bakkies. Each and everyone took his loot. But because I didn't have a buyer, I had to go and store. And then this thing of police forum is something that started maybe that time, many years ago, where people ended up informing police, telling police about what they've heard of stolen furniture, and there is a storeroom full of furniture. So lento community policing forum is as old as the mountain, so to speak. So that is how I was arrested. I was charged. I took the rap. I ended up in sentence for 6.5 years. From Nigel prison, they transferred me to Modabi. It was a medium prison.
Where's Modabi?
Modabi is in Benoni.
Okay.
It's opposite Davidton.
Briefly, tell us about your time there, because you're angry. Your friends haven't come. Your accomplices haven't come to see you. Tell us about your time in prison and how you were exposed to whatever was happening in the prison system that made you become this activist that you are today.
Luckily, I was Afrikaans speaking, and the Afrikaner Trongbewaarder, they loved me because I could speak the language, I could write the language, I could comprehend the language. I could also sing the anthem in Afrikaans, uit die blauw van onze hemel, uit die diepte van ons see. Now, what is interesting of the then, the stem, they used to call it, you could never sing the stem without first altering the slogan. There's a slogan that says, nooit hoeveel kinders wat trou is te vra, wat beteken jou vlag dan Suid-Afrika. Then you can start singing.
What does that mean? Say
You know,
it in English, please.
you know, out of the depth of heaven and the mountains and hills that sing, that is where our fatherland comes from. Egtes waar die Franse antwoord gee.
I went to an Afrikaans school and they taught us that stuff. I
Yeah.
can still remember it from back in the day.
Yes, you were not allowed to sing the anthem without first altering the slogan, you know. Nooit hoeveel kinders wat trou is te vra wat beteken jou vlag dan Suid-Afrika, then you can start to sing, you know. So that is how the Afrikaners started to have a liking in me. But I became very rebellious as well in prison. You know, I became a rebel because I was not impressed what was happening in terms of the treatment of both sentenced and unsentenced prisoners. It was contrary to what we were told or what you are told when you are sentenced. You are going to prison now and you're going to come there and you will be educated, you will be trained, you will be given skills, and you will become out a rehabilitated and a better person. That was contrary what happened. That is why one became also a rebel. But before I became a rebel, I was a teacher, you know, in school where we were paid 150 a month. And they allowed me, you know, they had preparatory courses, and then they had standard 5 up to standard 9. Matric, you will have then you have to become a private candidate. You study then privately. But I was in fact used to teach my fellow prisoners, inmates, Afrikaans, English, maths, science, and biology in Afrikaans. And that is in fact what these guys started to have a liking in me. But I was not impressed with the treatment, you know. And I was told, good, look, man, Miles, you are not a proper K. It's not a rechte kaffer nie. So we will treat you otherwise, but please don't make them clever, these people. Don't educate these people, because they will remain what they are. And those are the things that made me very angry. And not long after that, I was dismissed as a teacher.
What are some of the things, besides this, not treating them and not giving them the information that would make them clever? What are some of the nitty-gritties of the things you saw in prison that didn't make you happy about how prisoners are treated in prison?
Well, long before there was a constitution articulating Chapter 2 of the Bill of Rights, Section 35, subsection 2, paragraph E, that strictly deals with the rights of sentenced and unsentenced prisoners. Long before that, we who lived far ahead of our times knew that this day would come where prisoners would have a right. But what made me also very angry and very rebellious and ungovernable, there were not rights then. Prisoners, fellow prisoners, were assaulted, they were brutalized. Some of them were killed. You know, some of them were thrown into the furnace. Now, the furnace is this big stoves that are used to cook food for prisoners. They used to throw some of these prisoners in there and write a letter that he escaped from prison. And people wouldn't follow it up. And those are the things that made me very angry. And then I ended up talking about it. Then they told me, but it's got nothing to do with you. We're giving you a much modernized, better treatment, and we're treating you as a human being because of who you are, Miles. But I could not take that, okay? And there were some students that were snitches and informers, because the section where those prisoners that were schooling were separate from the gang paradise where the gangsters are operational. So during night hours, we used to talk about the Mandelas, the Robert Sibukwes, talk about the Steve Bikos, the ANC and the PAC. And then there were some of the students that end up informing these Afrikaners. At night, Miles and the other prisoners are talking about Mandela. Who's Mandela? Steve Bikos, Robert Sibuko. Who are these people? That is how I got expelled as a teacher and then sent to they used to call it I block, where they are strictly gangsters accommodated according to the floors. You'd get a 26 on the third floor, the 27s and the 28s, you know. And then they ended up separating the gangsters not only with floors but with sections. You understand? And when I got there, I even became more influential because I was using my skills as a person that speaks Afrikaans to write reports of transfers, and even became a jailhouse lawyer, you know, where we used to write to the appeal, to the High Court to appeal certain sentences and certain convictions. And sometimes it comes back with a positive response, and that is how my fellow inmates started to have a liking in me as well, because all this was done in Afrikaans. Now, it's the Afrikaner prison warder that likes me because I'm speaking Afrikaans. It is my fellow inmates who also like me, you know, because there were a signal sent out to the Big Fives that they must assassinate me. Now, the Big Fives are the gangsters that collaborate with the system. You can even follow their language, the prison lingo that they communicate with. It is spiced with a little bit of broken Afrikaans. But they couldn't do that because I was assisting each and every fellow inmate that wanted either a transfer, want to get his case appealed, or want to go and attend a funeral, and so on. That is how influential I became. And then came the last Delmas trialist. These were 15 cadres that were arrested all over the Transvaal region, it used to be called. Some of them were from Durban, Eastern Cape, some of them were from Mpumalanga, and so on. But they were arrested with limpet mines, AK-47s, and so on, and they were kept at Modderby to attend their cases at the Delmas region. And they used to be called, all those that were arrested for political activism ended up in Modderby so that they could be nearer to the circuit court, which was in Delmas. And these guys were very concerned because every weekend there were gang fights where fellow inmates used to attack one another. And this was all the orchestration and the perpetuation of the system that prisoners be at their throats all the time and not think about fighting for better food, better treatment, better education, and so on, you know. And this guy said, guys, Miles, you and other guys, why don't you start a structure and use the structure to influence some of these gangsters and infiltrate the gangsters so that you guys stop killing and hurting one another. That is where the South African Prisoners Organization for Human Rights came. But we wanted to know, where do we start? They gave us then the ANC constitution because all of them were MK cadres. And then they said, here is the ANC constitution. You guys can read and write. So why don't you just add here, delete there, and plagiarize the constitution? And that is exactly what we did. I even have the original constitution of how we plagiarized the ANC constitution and make it the constitution of the South African Prisoners Organization for Human Rights.
You plagiarized the constitution of the ANC. You got started with your organization. When was it established, and how is it working with the correctional services system of government?
Well, the organization started in prison. And if you don't believe me, there is still a cadre that is still alive. His name is Pitama Luleka. He's from Pretoria. Someday I would be able to give you his contact numbers, but I must first get consent from him so that he can confirm what I'm telling you. We started it in prison in 1986-87. Okay, that was even the time when Popcro was also rising, you know, led by Gregory in Cape Town. So I was released in 1991. And the reason why it's like it has always been in me. I could never sit there, fold my hands, and I see things go wrong, you know. And this is how we then started getting ourselves organized. And when I've made a vow, in fact, that when I go out of prison, I was going to continue with the struggle. And that is exactly what I did. I was even refused parole because parole was going to let me be monitored when I'm outside. And I said, no, I don't want to be monitored. When I go out, I want to immediately start with activism of prisoners' rights. That was long before the Constitution talked about prisoners' rights. So I was released in 1991, and I was to a certain extent also assisted by Pop Crew to squat in their offices at corner Noord and Plain Street, at Dark House, And that is how the struggle very slowly started when I was in prison. It's a long, hard, cold, and very lonely road that I've been walking ever since. And
how has the organization been received by the Department of Justice and Correctional Services? What is your working relationship with them, so that you can take us into the goings on of that department or of those facilities and this current story that has everyone interested in the country, the story of the escape of Thabo Bester?
Look, the Department of Correctional Services had a tendency since time immemorial. Previously, it was run along the lines of a glorified volksstykie, where the Afrikaners earned and owned everything, from the prisoner to the infrastructure to everything. It was theirs. They lived there, they died there, they get aged there, they buried there. And it's unfortunate that the new dispensation has adopted that kind of mentality, turning it into a glorified Bantustan, where our black brothers will tell you that ibantiti lamli, ijele lamli, ikandakanda yamle, ingolovana yamle, everything that moves, and you're not going to tell them anything, because when you end up in prison, there's very few that will have sympathy for those who are behind bars. That is the reason why the system has gone to an extent that the rights of prisoners, as articulated in the Constitution, is not worth the paper it is written on. Now, we have been struggling since my release to get a recognition and procedural agreement with the Department of Correctional Services. And this document is a revolving document. It's a recycled document. And there were some years ago some progressive correctional officers that wanted to give us recognition. That didn't happen. Even up to so far, we are fighting to get recognition. We are kept away from this institution because we refused to be co-opted and captured. In fact, we wanted to play the watchdog role. And if we were given that opportunity to play a watchdog role, not an oversight role, a watchdog role, I'm definitely sure all these things that you hear now, even the one of Thabo Bester, it was never going to happen on our watch, because we were talking about prisoners' representative structures, where prisoners will have their committees on the floors, in the cells, and in the section. That is a model that we sold to them many years ago, since my release.